as you see, when we get to the Baroque period, we are no longer going to make it. It becomes increasingly popular. The composers are increasingly well known and popular. You can sort of get through the Middle Ages in an evening. You can sort of eke out the Renaissance. Man, you can't even get through Bach in a week. So that's just preposterous. And then we get into classical, which is Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. You've got to be kidding. And then Romantic period, there's only about 800 composers that we all know. So things are going to slow down a bit. I hope between now and next week we can get to the Baroque period. But if we don't, that's okay. We'll still do some fun stuff, and it'll all be cool.
There's always the winter.
There's always the winter. That's right. Well, then there's November. Sam and I we'll pick out some dates in November, which is pre-winter-ish. I realize winter always hits here on November the 1st. We all know that's the day. I think this is the 8th winter in a row. Someone says to me, oh, it never snows on Orcas. Lies. Lies. That's why I bought a 4-wheel drive this time around and don't live up on the top of Buck Mountain anymore. So, we're going to talk about the Baroque period. The word Baroque comes from a Portuguese word called barroco, which means a misshapen pearl. In essence, the word is cheap costume jewelry. That's what the word Baroque meant. It was not meant as a compliment. In fact, it was meant as an insult. When it came out, the classical period named this period the Baroque period. So, I mean, they didn't call themselves the Baroque period. The classical period called them the Baroque period. And what they were saying is, it was trashy, it was frilly, it was ornate, it was gaudy, it was shoddy, it was, the word Baroque was not intended as a compliment. Now, of course, it's just, we all know what Baroque means, and we know the art and the architecture and the music and so on and so forth. Filling space with action and movement. That's what Baroque is. There's something happening everywhere. I'm sure every time I come back from Europe and I see all of these ceilings painted and these walls and the cherubs and the angels and the painting, I come back to my own house, I look at blank and I think, look at all that empty space. I mean, I need a painting up there. We need to put art everywhere. I have yet to find a partner who agrees with me. So I just keep cycling through partners until just keep writing checks until someone goes, yeah, art on the ceiling. Cheaper just to put the art on the ceiling. Anyway, so how would you expect the music to sound? Let me remind you, by way of a review, that we started off here. So that's where we started. Got to the Renaissance. Clearly a different sound. And now Baroque period. Now, yeah, busy, ornate, gaudy, elaborate, filling space. I used to put up with almost anything in a classroom, including, sorry, I just can't do it off. It's just, we'll hear some more of that. Including, I don't like all that old classical music. It all sounds the same.
What?
No. Helen Keller can hear the difference between chant and palestrina and all of those notes. I mean, it doesn't all sound the same. Feel free, I would say to students, feel free to hate it all. But don't ever say it all sounds the same. It doesn't. There's light years, there's eons, there's parsecs between here and here. It's astounding. And the fact that this lasted for 1,000 years. Notice that the periods are getting, shorter. Yeah. So 1,000 years. Okay, now we're down to here. That's considerably less time before we get to here, and so on and so forth. So the technology of music, remember we talked about printed music and so on and so forth. Music starts to spread quicker for all of the obvious reasons. So now, Baroque period, busy, ornate, gaudy, elaborate, all of that. Names associated with the Baroque period, we talked about Galileo last week, he's there. The Pilgrims were listening to Baroque music on their iPods when they were doing whatever they were doing. Rembrandt, I had a very interesting, we'll get to this. Now this is a digression, it's not Monty Python. I remember my master's comp exams, and I'm sure many of you have been in school, and it's where you study for 12 hours a day, and 5 people with music doctorates can ask you any question in the world they want to, and you get your degree or you don't. No pressure there. And I remember the first question was, talk about the music that Thomas Jefferson listened to. And I was stunned, because I hadn't done anything with Thomas Jefferson since I got out of high school. All I'd learned was music. And I learned in that flash of a moment that there's not much crossover between art forms in world history and art and so on. I'm going, Thomas Jefferson, okay, 1776, I know he was there. Middle Ages, 450, 1450, Renaissance, 1450, 1600, 1560. I'm doing all this in my head. Classical music, 70, he must have been listening to classical music. So then I could talk about it. But it never occurred to me that Thomas Jefferson listened to Mozart. No. I never put those two together. And that's what I mean about the separation of, you go to a class and you learn music. And then you go to a class and you learn art. And then you learn poli-sci. And then you learn world history. But the crossover is what fascinates me. I never bothered to think Thomas Jefferson and Mozart.
Well, weren't the colonies 2 or 3 decades behind the continent?
Oh, yeah, for sure. But you remember Benjamin Franklin's over in England. I mean, so there was crossover. What's that?
France.
Yeah. He was doing, yeah, absolutely. So the intelligentsia was not uninformed. So I'd never put those together. So that's why when I do a piece like this, I talk about, we don't have time now, but Rembrandt. I mean, Rembrandt was painting during the Baroque period. That is significant to me, because if you look at Rembrandt paintings, how much there is going on, and the darkness of it, all of that, we get lost in that. Louis XIV, Versailles, I mean, probably at least half of you have been to Versailles. I mean, oh my God, there's over-the-top, busy, ornate, gaudy, and elaborate, if there ever such thing exists. The colonization of the world is going on. That's important in music because it established a wealthy merchant class. It was a way for peasants to make money. Remember clergy, nobility, and peasants? Well, when you have travelers, those guys brought back wealth and they made money and so on and so forth. And we talked about what people spend money on. I mean, it's shelter, it's food, it's entertainment. In that order. In that order. So when you move money into the middle class, the middle class wants entertainment. So there is now more and more and more music to meet that demand. We'll get into that. Music is also, for the first time now in the Baroque period, taught. You can learn music. It's taught in churches and it's taught in schools. So if you did not grow up in a musical family, let's face it, 90% of, well, it was boys at the time, because girls in general didn't have careers. 90% of males going into business did whatever their dad did. I mean, that was just it. That's how you learn. You learn from your father and so on and so forth. But we are getting into a time period where if you didn't want to build cabinets or shoe horses or whatever the case may be, you could go learn music. And that's quite a change of pace from where we've been for a couple of thousand years. All right. Before we get into all these composers, which is a really cool part, let's talk about, I love this board. Thank you, Cynthia and Greg. Music style and practice, just quickly talking about that. Couple of styles in the Baroque period going on at the same time. Polyphonic and homophonic, both. You've been here all the time with the Monty Python references, so you know the difference between those. Polyphonic is different lines all happening simultaneously. Everybody's doing their own thing. We know that. It's flashy, it's pizzazzy, it's dancey, it's the bop piece I played. We are also getting in more and more to homophonic music. Remember the problem with polyphonic music. There were two problems. Remember we talked about it last week. And it had a lot to do with the Reformation and all of that. What are two problems with polyphonic music?
You can't understand what
You
they're saying.
cannot understand the words. So if you're singing a song about Jesus, you may or may not know that. If you're trying to tell a story, right, if you're trying to convey information or sing a song or tell a story, polyphonic is not going to get you there. And you have to be a trained musician to do polyphonic. You can't just hand out a piece of polyphonic music. Remember, as Vesta was from Latmos till Descending, the madrigal, you can't just hand that out and go, okay, we're all going to sing. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's not going to happen. Homophonic music is there's one main melody line. Everything now is homophonic. Turn on the radio if you're not listening to King. But everything else, music now is homophonic. There is a melody line, like a hymn. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. The melody line. All of the other lines affect the feeling and the texture and the ambiance of that line, but they're not the interesting ones. I'm sorry, altos, tenors, and basses. They're not. Nobody goes home singing the alto line to Amazing Grace. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I was, see, that's not the line you sing. You sing the melody line. That's homophonic music. Well, the plus in homophonic music is it's dramatic. Everybody doing the same thing at the same time. What was that, those Irish dance people that all jumped up and down at the same time? River dance. I used to be stunned at the number of people doing exactly the same thing at the same time. It's bloody powerful, is what it is. That's what homophonic music is. Everybody doing the same thing at the same time. So you have flash and trash versus drama. Going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. By the way, I have no energy on bad. I love flash and trash. Come to a Choral Society concert. You'll see as much flash and trash as I can get away with. Sometimes more than I can get away with, but we're not debating that now. Debate that later. So music takes place in three places, essentially: church, chamber, and theater. So music, still a lot happening in church. More happening in church now because of the breakdown of the church. So now you have more religions and faiths and so on and so forth producing their own music. Chamber, that's what the nobility, they're paying for music. And when we get to some people like Haydn, oh my gosh, Haydn was expected, I'm leaping ahead, Haydn had to produce 2 major concerts and 2 operas a week.
Whoa.
In addition to daily chamber music during dinner and whatever else. That was for the Esterházys out in the forest someplace. Can you imagine? I mean, LA Opera only does 4 or 5 operas in a freaking season. And Haydn's cranking out 2 a week. Plus major concerts. Because the rich people wanted to be entertained. And in those days, you couldn't put on you couldn't do this. You had to get it live. So, chamber. Theater. Well, now there's something new. You can't have theater until you have an abundance of people with money. Yeah, there's no point in having a theater for nobility. I mean, they did have their theaters, we're about to talk about that, but you're not going to put on a show, right, for 2,000 people, which, by the way, in the Baroque period, in the Renaissance, when Shakespeare put on a play, there was something like 17 theaters or something in London in the day. And they had to put 2,000 people per show in those theaters, something like 35 times a year in order to break even. That's how many people were going to live entertainment. Because I ask you, what else was there to do? I mean, seriously, it was entertainment. So theater was big business in the Baroque period. All right, instruments versus vocal. This is a huge change in the Baroque period. Up until now, the instruments in the Middle Ages, what few there were, and certainly in the Renaissance, were trying to keep up with the voices. And they imitated the voices. Now, technology starts kicking vocal ass. Okay. Now technology, instruments tend to surpass vocal music. You can dump that in. Yeah, it's now the voices that have to keep up with the instruments. And wait till I play some of this stuff for you. The vocal calisthenics that Bach and Handel expected from their singers would put modern day singers to shame. There are not many who can do it. You were expected to improvise that second time through that da capo aria. I mean, you had to keep, a soprano had to sing everything a violin can play. Wow. It's astounding what they were expected to do because they're filling space with action and movement. So doing a ballad is not going to get the job done. The voices have to keep up. The piano is invented. There is, we know of a piano, at least one was completed by about 1700. Bartolomeo Cristofori invented the piano. He did, and so the piano now is in existence. That said, the piano is not particularly widespread or popular until after the Baroque period. We had one in 1700. It's 1800 before, it's one of Bach's sons, Johann Christoph, I can't remember, it doesn't matter, because I'm not taking an exam now, but at one time I had to know. One of Bach's sons was the first person to ever play a piano in a public concert. It is likely that Bach never even saw a piano. He may have, when he was visiting somebody that great I can't remember in Austria, then, this does not matter. He might have seen a piano, but I used to get livid with my students who say, you know, they bring in a piece, you know, by Bach, and they would bring something on the piano. Yeah, I know, Bach is played on piano all the time now, and it's not that it isn't enjoyable, don't get me wrong, but that's not what Bach wrote it for. Bach wrote for harpsichord and organ. Those were his instruments. And I persist in believing that if Bach had written something for piano, he would have written something different. Because that's how good he was. Now, yes, it sounds great on piano, and that's where it's played now, and there's nothing wrong with it. I've heard Bach on steel drums in the Caribbean, and it sounds pretty good too. But I think a lot of people just assume Bach wrote music for the piano, and he didn't. Probably never even saw one. We also have an interesting phenomenon which used to horrify my students in class, and I love that. Found that quite entertaining. So there are really six kinds of soloists in the Baroque period. There are sopranos, there are altos, there are tenors, there are basses. There are also boy sopranos and boy altos. And there are castrati, which is a pretty strange phenomenon, really. Castrati is when you say to a young boy whose voice has not changed, "Yoo-hoo, little boy, I have good news and bad news." The good news is you have a superb voice. The bad news is you're not going to lose it. But you are going to lose those. Now, what? Yeah. Why this bizarre practice of castrating young boys so their voice wouldn't change? Several reasons.
They didn't have puberty blockers yet.
Well, yeah, they didn't have those either. There were no women singing in church, so if you wanted that particular sound, you had to get it elsewhere. There were also generally no women respectably in the theater. A woman actress was generally on the same social level as a prostitute. Not really all that different than, you know.
Some things don't change.
Some things don't change. So that was one of the reasons. The other was, arguably, male voices were stronger than female voices. Remember, day and age before microphones. So if you wanted the sound out there for larger and larger audiences, you needed to have bigger voices. The majority of the sort of the castrati phase happened between 1650 and 1750. That was the peak of castrati, and castrati were the superheroes of their day. They were the most popular, the most highly paid. If you want to read a great book, I don't know how many of you read Anne Rice. I love Anne Rice. I love the Vampire Chronicles. I love The Witching Hour. She wrote a book called Cry to Heaven. So if you want to read, it's great fiction, but it's historical fiction. She researched it. So when the boy's castrated, voice doesn't change. Well, that's not true. It goes through a change even still because the hormones are produced someplace else and blah, blah, blah. You can go through that change, post-castration, and lose your voice altogether. That happened about half the time.
Wow.
So talk about making the ultimate sacrifice for very little return. Otherwise, voice goes through the change, the body grows somewhat elongated, we are told. There is no, well, that's not true. Sorry to say, there's no recording of a castrati. There is one recording. Surprisingly, the act of castration, young boys, was banned legally in 1861. The Pope banned it in 1878. So in 1878, the Pope said, no, we're not going to do this anymore. The last castrati sang in the Sistine Chapel in 1913. That's how long it took for the Pope's edict to trickle down. The last castrati died. His name was Alessandro Moreschi. You can look him up on YouTube. Died in 1922. It was called The Angel of Rome. That recording we have. He was in his 80s, and recordings, obviously, in 1922 were not very good. That's all we've got, other than what's written about castratis. But there were, I cannot remember who was the French king. It wasn't Louis. Oh, man, I hate it when information, just bizarre information that nobody cares about. There was one king, he hired this great castrati. Who was the guy? Oh, I can't remember any of it. He bought him out of his career and brought him to the castle and said, sing for me every night. And that was the guy's career for like the last 15 years of his life. And he lived like a king. I mean, these people were enormously well paid. They were the superstars of their day. And I guess they sort of deserve it for, for the sacrifice you make. Now, if what we read is true, the sound is amazing. Today, all we have to go by are countertenors. And I'm sure you've all heard countertenors. I want to play a little bit for you, and I picked this one because it's a piece by Purcell. Music for a While. You probably, I'm sure you know this. Yeah, we'll come on there in a minute. Music for a while shall all your cares beguile, wondering how your pains were eased. Basically, it's whatever problems you have, music will solve it. Purcell was a countertenor, so most of what he wrote is there. Here's a countertenor singing it, and I've picked this arrangement. I should play it when we talk about Purcell, but I'm going to play it now because it's a countertenor. it's done with a jazz combo. So here's music that is essentially, it's over 300 years old. It's being sung by a countertenor in place of castrati, and it's being done by with bass drums and a little brush and snare kind of thing happening. Wait, listen to this sound. This is so cool. I'm so enamored of it. Here we go. I'll have to flip back on here. Oh, it's still there. So that's a countertenor. Jazz perfect. Yeah, I just get up. It's just gorgeous. I love that sound. I love that sound. Yeah.
If Monty Python didn't do a castrati, he sure missed a.
He sure missed the boat.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
I can't remember one of.
I don't think they did. I do remember it wasn't Monty Python, but who was it? The guy? Which movie? What? Marriage.
Oh.
Is
yeah.
which movie? Princess
Bride.
Princess Bride.
There we go. It's Princess Bride. Yeah.
Marriage is what
She's- Yeah, that always is such a Monty Python bit to me. Anyway, when I would have students in class, they go, "Oh, that just sounds so weird." No. There is no boy band in existence that doesn't have a countertenor, right? Because you have to have Art Garfunkel, countertenor. Interestingly enough, most countertenors in their regular range are basses. They're not tenors. They're basses. I have a couple of recordings of Art Garfunkel where he drops down to a low G. And you go, whoa, where'd that come from? And it's because if you're a bass, you have to develop a head voice to get those notes. If you're a tenor, you just belt them.
Yeah.
So what they're doing is they're singing a falsetto, they're singing in a very well-developed head voice. That's as close as we can get to the castrati thing. And there's a whole thing. When I play some Handel pieces for you and another personal piece in a minute, I'm gonna play countertenor because that's just sort of what goes with it. I love the sound. I love the sound of a countertenor. I think it's just kind of buttery and warm and beautiful. I just really think it's pretty.
Do you have access to that recording of the last castrati?
Yes, I think you can find it on YouTube. I will check and see. The recording is out there. It's not very. It's like I said. It's not very good. Mareshi was 80 recordings were bad, but you know, it's all we've got. But here's the guy in mind you, it was outlawed in 1878.
Yeah.
That's what I find phenomenal. Outlawed in 1878, and the last castrati did not die until 1922. That's astounding to me, let alone singing in the Sistine Chapel. And mothers, there are stories of mothers bringing their children to church and saying, you know, this is after it was outlawed, well, he was nipped by a goose. And the priest goes, praise God, put him in the choir. I had a stepson once. I said to him, his voice hadn't changed. I said, I have a way for you to make a fortune. You have no idea how rich and powerful you could be with such a small sacrifice. I think I could have talked him into it. His mother didn't go for it. This reminds me, I need to write a check. Anyway. Forms. The forms in the Baroque period. So, operas, oratorios, cantatas, and chorales. Just want to say a word about operas. Opera was invented in the Baroque period. This is where opera came from. It was a group of Florentine noblemen called the Camerata. What they were trying to do, I'm not going to wax on about this, it's a little wonky, they were trying to reinvent Greek drama. They thought, rightly or wrongly, that the Greeks sang all their plays. They somehow got that into their head. So that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to reinvent Greek drama, and what they came up with, sort of accidentally, was opera. I also want to make a distinction between a play, a musical, and operas. Because not in this room, which is mercifully one of the more intelligent rooms I hang out in, which is kind of nice, I gotta tell you. Plays are all spoken. Yeah? Musicals are dialogue, and occasionally, for no reason whatsoever, people burst into song, walking down the street, dancing simultaneously with other people. In the rain. And operas are all sung all the time. Right? That's the definition. The definition of opera is sung drama. Students used to say to me, how come nobody writes operas anymore? I go, they write them all the time. Evita. Hamilton. Les Mis. Come From Away. I mean, I can do this for another 10 or 15.
Disney is musical theater.
Yes. So why do they call them musicals?
Because it's more popular.
Do you remember concurrent associations? Remember we were talking about how to listen to music, and it's the pictures or images that come to mind? When I say opera, images come to mind. And for good reason, in many cases. You can't call Hamilton an opera, no one will go. You call it a musical, and it plays in New York for 20 years at $250 a ticket. Isn't that interesting? That's amazing to me. That's amazing to me.
So operetta is in between musical?
Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Operetta is going to be right in there. And don't get me wrong, I'm not about to tell you that the quality well, quality is the wrong word. Complexity is the word. I'm not about to tell you that the complexity of Evita, although I love that show, it's my favorite Andrew Lloyd Webber show, that the complexity of Les Mis is Rossini or Mozart or whatever. But I am telling you those are operas, because nobody talks and everything is sung. I just find the phenomenon, the contemporary phenomenon of mislabeling so that people will go, interesting to me. Oratorios are religious operas, only you don't act them out. In the Baroque period, it was verboten to write an opera about a Bible story. You could not write an opera about God or the Bible. That was uber sacrilegious. Well, if you're a composer, there's all these great stories that you can't get to. So you write an oratorio, which, by the way, Handel essentially invented the English oratorio. We'll get to that. So this gives me access to Bible stories. It's also cheaper. I don't have to costume, I don't have to act it out, I don't have to rehearse as much. But essentially, an oratorio is a religious opera where everybody just stands there. That's, as most of you know, that's what it is. The oratorios, by the way, came from a form way back further. Filippo Neri was the guy, because they were sung in oratories in church, late night services. They would do these concerts in order to get people to attend. I remember in the 60s and 70s when pop music started happening in church. And some of my, constituents were like, I can't believe they're just doing that trashy music so they'll get people to go to church. Nobody's ever done that. Well, no, they've done it for a while now. Cantatas. Cantatas are like mini oratorios, as you know, right? Bach wrote tons and tons of cantatas. A cantata, an oratorio, 3 hours. A cantata, 30 minutes. Round numbers. A cantata, a Lutheran service in the Baroque period was generally 4 hours long. The sermon alone in a Lutheran service, 1 hour. The cantata was there for a break. It really was. I mean, it was there to kind of wake people up. It's 4 hours. And, as I mentioned the other night, I heard sometime, Bach, wrote cantatas using drinking songs in the bass part, so people would listen, to 99 bottles of beer, and they're like, oh, that's cool, and they'd wake up and do the thing. A chorale is just another word for a hymn, right? So a chorale is, we call them hymns, they call them chorales. So those are the forms. All right. Let's talk about composers. I want to talk about a couple of composers. I'm not going to play their music for you, but I have to talk about them because they're just too cool. Claudio Monteverdi, Claude to his friends. Claudio Monteverdi, I love his father's career. His father was a barber and a surgeon. I just love that. Get your hair cut and remove your spleen. Yeah, his father was a barber. I mentioned Monteverdi only for one reason. Monteverdi wrote the earliest operatic masterpieces. You want to know the first great opera composer? That's the guy. Monteverdi. Orfeo. He wrote about 13. We have 3 of them, I think. We know about the others. We don't have the others. But Monteverdi in 1607 wrote Orfeo, first genuine that we go, yeah, that's an opera, we can go. So Monteverdi deserves to be mentioned. Jean-Baptiste Lully. I just have to tell you about Lully because it's such a great story. I'm not going to play his music, but it's such a great story. Lully was Italian. He was born in Italy. He was brought to France at the age of 14. With his cousin, who was some sort of trickle-down royalty. He was her page. So he came to France in the court of Louis XIV. He wrote a satirical song about his cousin. So he's 14. He's her page. He's at the court in France. He writes a satirical song about her. He loses his job. He gets fired. He goes and hangs out. He's 14, 15. He's about 16 now. He goes and hangs out in the kitchen for all the obvious reasons. I mean, it's a castle, but, the food. So he goes and hangs out in the kitchen, and he plays violin. He's actually a good violinist. He gets hired for the orchestra when they hear him play the violin. When he's 20 years old, he dances with the king in a ballet and is named court composer. Let me say that once more. When he's 20, he dances with the king in a ballet and he's appointed court composer. Now, not an untalented fellow, I admit, however he might have ascended to glory. He was the composer, the conductor, the director, and the stage manager. Jean-Baptiste Lully, the Italian, essentially invented French opera for Louis XIV. So he ran the opera, and he was, this is my favorite description, I can't remember which text, of Lully. Haughty, arrogant, ambitious, and not overly concerned with matters of morality.
Sounds French.
Doesn't he though?
Sounds French.
He's conducting one day. He hits his foot with the staff. In those days, you didn't do this. You pounded a stick on the ground. He hit his foot. Gangrene set in. He refused to have it amputated. He died. So, in the textbooks, Lully is the first person who committed suicide by conducting. Lully slept his way to the top, invented French opera, and killed himself with his own baton. So, how can you not talk about that as a composer? I'm not going to play any of his music for you, but I am. Oh man, where does the time go? But I am going to talk about Purcell. I love Henry Purcell. I really do. What an underrated composer. I'm going to play a piece of his for you. I have heard it said, because I've said it, that Henry Purcell was the last great English composer until Paul McCartney. Now, I could build a case for that. I really could. True, it sort of overlooks Britain. It sort of overlooks Vaughan Williams, and particularly overlooks William Walton, who's, I think, my favorite turn-of-the-century composer. But it is, in essence, true. When Purcell died, and I'm going to talk about it, Purcell was this magnificent composer, and he was very popular. When Purcell died, the reason England never became a musical superpower is they started importing music rather than producing their own. Purcell really was the last great English composer. After that, they brought in Handel. Handel wasn't English, he was German, and he was educated in Italy. So he had nothing to do with it. Now, admittedly, Handel invented English oratorio. He also spoke English quite well, along with German and Italian, and I mean, talk about a smart guy when we get to Handel. But for some reason, England bailed on its own musicality and started importing other musicians. And that's why, in essence, England has not been a terribly powerful musical country. Purcell published his first piece when he was 8. At the age of 15, he became the organ tuner at Westminster Abbey. At the age of 18, he became composer for the Royal Band. At the age of 20, the organist at Westminster Abbey resigned to give Purcell the job. That was his teacher. He said, I give up, you're better than I am. And he gave the job to Purcell, who, as I recall, I think Purcell is, I'm almost positive, I think Purcell is buried under the organ at Westminster Abbey. I'm almost sure that's true. They've moved the console, so he's not under it anymore, but he was. I think Purcell was buried there. I'm almost sure that's true. Purcell, I like Purcell because he wrote bawdy songs as well as sacred music and so on and so forth. If you look up in 95% of textbooks, it says Purcell died at the age of 36. And I'm always like, well, why? How? I mean, not that you know, life expectancy was all that long. So I kept digging until I found out Purcell was a workaholic. I mean, like Bach, but a workaholic. He was working late one night. He came home, kid you not, his wife had locked him out of the house, so he slept on the sidewalk in front of the house, caught pneumonia, and died. I kid you not. I kid you not.
Why'd she lock him out?
Because she was pissed that he didn't come home because he kept working late and so on and so forth. So I hope she gets everything she so richly deserves. Purcell wrote one opera called Dido and Aeneas. I don't know if you know the opera. He wrote it for a girls' school. He wrote it in 1689, and most of the roles are female because he wrote it for the girls' school. I'm going to just play. We'll finish up. I'm going to play this one piece for you, and I should play something up and pizzazzy and whatever. I'm not. I'm going to play When I Am Laid in Earth because it's just exquisitely painful, and it's so beautiful. But the story of Dido and Aeneas. This gives you a general idea of Baroque opera. So Aeneas is a Trojan Greek war. No. Beware of Greeks bearing gifts. He's a Trojan, so he's fleeing Troy. He's running away from losing the city, and he shipwrecks in Carthage, which is on the north coast of Africa. And when he shipwrecks, he encounters Dido, and so all of you have to be careful with these how you pronounce all of this. I mean, go with me, Dido, Aeneas. Anyway, so all of the shepherds start mingling with all of the queen's consorts, and they all have a big party, and they run to a cave, and it rains, and Dido and Aeneas hook up, and they're having a wonderful time. 3 witches come. There are always 3 witches. 3 witches come and remind Aeneas that his destiny is to found Rome. His destiny is to discover the Roman Empire. And he goes, oh, that's right. So he goes to Dido and he goes, I'm really sorry, but it turns out, me and the boys, we have to go. I have to go discover Rome. And Dido says, you rat bastard, you have your way with me and toss me aside like so much trash, I spit on you. Aeneas says, okay, I'll stay. And Dido goes, not now you won't. Get out. And he does, and she commits suicide. Sticks her hand in a basket of snakes. So, the last thing she sings is this gorgeous number, which is, and by the way, when I am laid in earth, may my wrongs create no trouble in thy breast. Remember me, but forget my fate. It's exquisite. And it's usually sung by the soprano who is lying down. I mean, they're not standing up. I got to tell you, as a singer, lying on the floor is not the easiest way to produce a sound. Listen to this, and this is Purcell. It is so exquisitely beautiful. You don't listen to the whole opera, I suppose, but oh my God. Let me get to that. Where did we go?
Oh, yeah.
Now, like I said, that's a horrible way to end the session. But, oh my God, that's just so beautiful. And to see it sung by somebody lying on the floor, you know, tossing off those pianissimos at the top. And then that's the end of the opera, and a couple of years later, Purcell dies, and England starts importing music. Wow. You hear how romantic that music is? Yeah. I mean, remember what Bach sounded like? It's busy and ornate and gaudy and elaborate. And Purcell is writing that line. It's like the man was phenomenal. And then he died. We buried him under the organ and went and bought Handel. Not that Handel was, you know, anything to sneeze at, but still, wow. Wow. And I don't, you know, think you need to listen to that 12 hours a day. I mean, put a gun in your mouth, I suppose, but after that. But man, if that doesn't say something to you over just 3 or 4 minutes, then wow, it's just incredible. Well, we have Vivaldi and Bach and Handel. We'll talk about Vivaldi and Bach and Handel next week. I look forward to it. See you.